This is the family embarrassment we all have to deal with. At my son's engagement party, his new fiancée introduced me to her wealthy family. Everyone laughed until her brother stared at me and went pale. "Wait, aren't you the secret billionaire who just bought our company?" And what I said next changed everything. Good thing you're here, honey. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels, because by the time I'm done, you'll understand why sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. My name is Margaret Chen, but most people just call me Maggie. I've spent the last 14 years perfecting the art of being strategically unremarkable. You ever notice how the most powerful people are the ones nobody sees coming? That's not an accident, honey. My son Kevin had been dating Amanda Blackwood for 7 months. 7 months of her asking pointed questions about my circumstances and whether I'd need help managing my finances as I got older. Red flag number 1. But we mothers see what we want to see, don't we? The way she'd walk through my modest apartment, eyes cataloging every discount store purchase, every clipped coupon on my kitchen counter. That smile when I mentioned shopping at Walmart wasn't kindness. It was a predator sizing up prey. But here's what Amanda didn't know. While she was calculating my net worth based on my Target wardrobe, I was already 3 moves ahead in a game she didn't even know we were playing. And honey, I'd been winning that game for 14 years. The engagement party was everything you'd expect from old Connecticut money. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 60 manicured acres, complete with a pavilion that could seat 400 and gardens that cost more than most people's houses. The air smelled like expensive perfume, fresh gardenias, and desperation. But we'll get to that. As my Uber pulled up, because yes, I took a $15 Uber to a millionaire's party, I watched Bentleys and Maseratis being valeted like precious jewels. Women emerged in gowns that cost more than teacher salaries, their jewelry catching sunlight like tiny spotlights screaming, "Look at my money." You know what real wealth looks like? It doesn't scream. It whispers. I chose my outfit with surgical precision. A navy dress from Nordstrom Rack, originally $200, marked down to $68, paired with my grandmother's pearl earrings. Nothing flashy, nothing memorable. See, I learned long ago that the key to privacy is looking exactly like what people expect to see. A widow living comfortably on an engineer's pension. The kind of woman who clips coupons, drives a reliable Honda, and considers Olive Garden a splurge. If only they knew that Honda was paid for in cash. From my checking account, not even my investment account. Amanda floated through the party in liquid silk and pearls, every inch the Connecticut princess. And Kevin? My baby looked happier than I'd seen him since his father passed. That smile was about to cost him everything. But sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable. I found myself at a corner table, not the family table, mind you, but positioned perfectly to observe. That's when Amanda approached with her entourage. Time for the main event. "Mom, Dad, Michael," she announced in that sugar-sweet tone that makes your teeth ache. "I want you to meet Kevin's mother." And then she delivered the line that would haunt her dreams. "This is Margaret Chen, Kevin's mother. She's been so supportive of our relationship, despite her circumstances." That pause before circumstances was deliberate. It hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Catherine Blackwood stepped forward first, all silver hair and cold diamonds. "How wonderful to finally meet you properly, Margaret. Amanda mentioned you work in cleaning services." The way she said cleaning services like it was a communicable disease. "I own a small cleaning company," I corrected gently. "Henderson Cleaning Services. We handle mostly commercial accounts downtown. Plant number 1, honey. Remember that name. It's going to matter more than anyone in that pavilion realized." "How industrious," Catherine replied, the word dripping with the kind of condescension that comes from never having worked a day in your life. Industrious, like I was a particularly clever aunt. Then came Richard Blackwood, all country club confidence and wandering attention. His handshake lasted exactly 1.2 seconds before his eyes were scanning for more important people. Rich men have this way of looking through you like you're made of glass. And this is our son, Michael, Catherine continued, gesturing toward a 28-year-old man absorbed in his iPhone with the focused intensity of someone trading cryptocurrency. Yeah, nice to meet you, he mumbled, without looking up, thumbs flying across his screen. In exactly 43 minutes, that same man would be choking on those words. But then something shifted. As I was answering Catherine's increasingly patronizing questions about my little business, Michael's head snapped up from his phone like he'd been electrocuted. His eyes locked onto my face with the intensity of a laser. "Wait," he said slowly, his phone forgotten in his hand. "Margaret Chen?" I watched the color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. The recognition was dawning, piece by piece, like a puzzle assembling itself in real time. "Margaret Chen," he repeated, louder this time, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter of the party. "Aren't you the woman from the acquisition board at Blackwood Industries 2 years ago?" The pavilion seemed to hold its breath. "Aren't you that mysterious investor who bought our company?" And just like that, 14 years of carefully constructed invisibility shattered like crystal. The words hung in the air like a bomb with a lit fuse. Amanda's face went white as fresh snow. Catherine's diamond bracelet caught the light as her hand flew to her throat. Richard's wandering attention snapped back like a rubber band. Other guests had begun to turn, sensing blood in the water. The truth is, honey, most people don't know what real wealth looks like. They expect flashy displays. The diamonds, the designer labels, the luxury cars parked like trophies. They don't expect a woman in a $68 dress who clips coupons and drives a Honda. That's exactly what I'd been counting on for 14 years. Real wealth, old wealth, generational wealth. It whispers instead of shouting. It wears understated clothes and drives practical cars because it doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It's secure in its own power. And honey, I was about to show them just how secure I really was. But first, let me tell you how a widow from Seattle accidentally became more powerful than the people who were laughing at her. It all started with my late husband David's brain, not his heart, though I love that too. His brilliant, methodical engineering brain that saw solutions where others saw problems. You know how your phone dies at the worst possible moment? David fixed that. Back in 2010, when smartphones were becoming ubiquitous, but battery life was still terrible, David developed something called an energy management system. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. It was revolutionary. Using advanced algorithms, his technology could extend battery life by 40% without requiring any hardware changes. Just software. Elegant. Simple. Brilliant. We thought we might retire comfortably. We had no idea we were sitting on a gold mine. The patent process took 2 years. 2 years of lawyers and applications and hoping we weren't throwing good money after bad. We'd seen other inventors pour their life savings into patents that never amounted to anything. But David's invention was different. By the time the patent was approved in 2012, 3 major tech companies were in a bidding war for the licensing rights. The patent sold for $30 million. $30 million. I remember the exact moment our lawyer called. David and I were in our small kitchen, sharing Sunday morning coffee and reading the paper. When the phone rang, we almost didn't answer. Who calls on Sunday morning with life-changing news? But something made David pick up. I watched his face transform as he listened, watched his eyes grow wide with disbelief. "We're millionaires," he said quietly after hanging up, multiple times over. And that's when our real education began. Kevin was 23 then, fresh out of his master's program in finance, working 60-hour weeks at his first job and loving every minute of it. He was proud of his independence, proud of the apartment he'd rented with his own money. That same day, David and I made a decision that would shape the next 12 years of our lives. We told Kevin we'd received a nice payout from the patent, enough to be comfortable, but nothing extravagant. He never questioned it. Probably assumed it was $1 million or $2 million at most. What Kevin didn't know was that $30 million was just the beginning. David and I approached wealth like the engineering problem it was. We researched every investment for months. We diversified across sectors and risk levels. We reinvested profits instead of spending them on toys. We were methodical, patient, strategic. By 2015, our portfolio had grown to $60 million. By 2018, we were worth over $250 million. David used to joke that we were accidentally becoming the kind of wealthy people we used to work for. But we kept living in our modest house, driving our reliable cars, shopping at the same stores. The only difference was the peace of mind that came from knowing we'd never have to worry about money again. And the knowledge that we could give Kevin a safety net without him ever knowing it existed. When David died suddenly in 2019, a heart attack at 62, our net worth was over $800 million. $800 million. The number was so large it felt abstract. For months after his death, I couldn't think about anything except how much I missed him. The money felt meaningless without David to share it with. But then I thought about Kevin, about the values we'd tried to instill, about David's belief that people should earn their own way in the world. So I kept the secret, and 18 months later, I used $800 million to acquire Blackwood Industries. The irony was delicious. While Amanda was looking down on me and asking if I needed help managing my finances, I had been the anonymous investor who saved her mother's company from bankruptcy, the same company Catherine had nearly destroyed with reckless expansion and poor debt management. I bought Blackwood Industries because the core business was solid despite Catherine's mismanagement. Good infrastructure, experienced employees, proven technology. Under proper financial oversight, it thrived. Within a year, the company was more profitable than it had ever been under Catherine's leadership. The woman whose daughter had just called me the family embarrassment had been living off my business decisions for the past 18 months, and she had no idea. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, looking directly at Michael with the kind of calm that comes from holding all the cards. "I think you're confusing me with someone else." But we both knew he wasn't. I could see the memory crystallizing in his eyes, that board meeting where I sat quietly while my lawyers handled the negotiations. At the time, he'd barely acknowledged me, assuming I was just someone's wife there for show. Now, as Amanda looked between us with growing panic, I realized my carefully guarded privacy was about to become a very big problem. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Other guests had begun to notice the tension, conversations dying as people strained to hear what was happening. Michael was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. Catherine's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Richard looked confused, clearly not grasping the significance of what his son was saying. And Amanda? Poor Amanda looked like her entire world was crumbling in real time. The woman she'd dismissed as a charity case, the embarrassing mother-in-law she'd have to tolerate, was apparently someone far more significant than she'd ever imagined. "I think," I said carefully, "that perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." But it was too late. The secret I'd guarded for 14 years was out, spreading through that pavilion like wildfire, and there was no putting it back. Which brings me to the next morning, honey. Picture this. Me in my cozy apartment, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, watching my son pace around my living room like a caged tiger. You know that feeling when your whole world shifts and nothing looks the same anymore? That was Kevin. He'd called me at 7 a.m. sharp, demanding answers I wasn't ready to give. I hadn't slept a minute, my mind replaying Michael's recognition and Amanda's calculating stare. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, cramped with the weight of 14 years of secrets. "Mom, you have to help me understand what happened last night," Kevin said, running his hands through his hair in that gesture he'd had since childhood. "Michael Blackwood cornered me after you left. He asked some very specific questions. I'd left quietly after Michael's revelation, claiming exhaustion. The truth was, I needed time to think. 14 years of carefully protected privacy had crumbled in a single moment, and I didn't know how to handle the fallout. Kevin was different from his father. Where David was methodical and strategic, Kevin was direct and emotional. He wore his feelings on his sleeve and expected the same honesty from others. The fact that I'd been lying to him for over a decade was going to cut deep. And honey, I was about to break my baby's heart. "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I could already guess. He wanted to know about Dad's tech patents, about whether you were involved in major business deals, about our family's real financial situation. Kevin stopped pacing and fixed me with those serious brown eyes he'd inherited from David. Mom, he seemed to think you were some kind of major investor. Suddenly, my coffee tasted like ash. This was the conversation I'd been dreading for 14 years. Kevin had built his career through pure talent and relentless hard work. He'd earned every promotion, every success, every dollar in his bank account. How could I explain that while he was working 60-hour weeks for a raise, I could have bought his entire company without blinking? The guilt was crushing. I'd watched him struggle with student loans, stress about mortgage payments, turn down vacations because he couldn't afford them, all while sitting on a fortune that could have solved every financial worry he'd ever had. But David and I had made a choice. We believed struggle builds character, that success means more when you earn it yourself. Now I wondered if we'd been terribly, tragically wrong. Kevin, sit down, I said gently. We need to talk. But before I could continue, my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. It was from Amanda. The message was short, but the tone was completely different from her usual saccharine sweetness. Margaret, I think we should have lunch today. There are some things Kevin and I want to discuss with you. Gone was the condescending politeness. This was the voice of someone who thought they'd just discovered buried treasure. I showed the message to Kevin, watching his face shift from confusion to concern to something approaching dread. What do you think she wants to talk about? He asked. I had a pretty good idea, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. Amanda Blackwood wasn't the type to leave loose ends untied, especially when money was involved. She'd probably spent the entire night researching, digging through old news articles, trying to piece together the puzzle of who I really was. The question was, how much had Michael actually remembered from that acquisition meeting 2 years ago? I think, I said carefully, that your fiancée is much smarter than we gave her credit for. And honey, smart can be very dangerous when it's paired with greed. Just then, Kevin's phone rang. Amanda's name lit up the screen, and even from across the room, I could hear her artificially bright voice. Kevin, honey, I was hoping we could all have lunch today. There are some family matters I'd love to discuss with your mother now that we're officially going to be family. Family matters, right. When he hung up, Kevin looked at me with the same expression he'd worn as a teenager when he suspected I knew more than I was letting on. Mom, is there something you need to tell me about our family's finances? Outside my window, I watched the familiar rhythm of people heading to work, people with normal concerns about meetings and deadlines and grocery bills. I envied that simplicity, that freedom from the weight of secrets and hidden wealth. Everything, I finally said. I need to tell you everything. But even as I said it, I knew that telling Kevin the truth was only the beginning. Amanda had figured out there was more to me than met the eye, and she wasn't going to let it go. She was going to dig and probe and investigate until she uncovered every secret I'd spent 14 years protecting. And then she was going to try to get her hands on as much of it as possible. Which brings us to lunch, honey. And let me tell you, Amanda had done her homework. The first rule of warfare: control the battlefield. She'd arrived at Le Bernardin, the most expensive restaurant in the city, 45 minutes early. The table she'd chosen had the best view of the harbor and was positioned so she could see everyone who entered. Strategic positioning. This girl had clearly learned something at Columbia. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo that probably took 2 hours to achieve. She wore a designer suit I'd seen in the latest issue of Vogue, navy blue with subtle pinstripes and gold buttons that caught the light like tiny suns. The price tag was probably more than most people's monthly rent. Margaret, Kevin, thank you so much for coming, she said, standing to embrace us both. Her smile was radiant, but I caught the calculating gleam in her green eyes as she assessed my simple black dress and understated jewelry. I'd chosen my outfit carefully again, maintaining the facade of modest means. I ordered a bottle of wine to celebrate us being family, she continued, gesturing to the sommelier approaching with what looked like liquid gold in a bottle. It was a Bordeaux I recognized from wine magazines, the kind that costs $900 and tastes like liquid history. Clearly, Amanda was setting the tone for this conversation. "How lovely, dear," I said, settling into my chair. Though perhaps a bit extravagant for a casual family lunch? Testing the waters, seeing how she'd respond to gentle pushback. "Oh, I don't think there's anything casual about our family anymore," she replied, her smile never wavering. "Last night, I had a fascinating conversation with Michael about his experiences in corporate acquisitions. There it was, the opening gambit." Kevin looked between us, sensing undercurrents he couldn't identify. "Amanda, what does this have to do with lunch?" Poor Kevin, still thinking this was about family bonding. She ignored him completely, her laser focus entirely on me. "You know, Margaret, I studied business at Columbia. Graduated summa cum laude with a concentration in corporate finance and mergers and acquisitions." Credentials. She was establishing her qualifications to play this game. "I find everything about complex investment structures absolutely fascinating. Shell companies, anonymous investors, offshore holdings. It's like financial archaeology." I took a sip of wine and waited. Never give them more information than they already have. Michael mentioned that when Blackwood Industries was sold, the buyer demonstrated remarkable discretion, almost like they preferred to remain invisible. She was fishing, casting her line and waiting to see what would bite. "The funny thing about discreet investors," she continued, warming to her subject like a professor delivering a lecture, "is they usually have compelling reasons for their privacy. Tax optimization, family dynamics, or simply preferring to operate away from public scrutiny." She paused to take a delicate sip of wine. "Usually, it's related to substantial fortunes they prefer to keep out of the public eye." "Sounds reasonable," I replied calmly. "Never confirm, never deny. Make them work for every piece of information." Amanda leaned forward slightly, adopting the conspiratorial tone of someone about to share insider information. "Michael said the lead investor at the acquisition meeting was a woman. Quiet, elegant, clearly comfortable in high-stakes negotiations, despite letting her legal team handle the details." Kevin was now staring at me like puzzle pieces were clicking into place. "Mom," he said quietly. Before I could respond, Amanda pulled out her phone with the flourish of a magician revealing their final trick. She showed us a photograph, a news story from 2 years ago about the Blackwood Industries acquisition, complete with a small photo from the signing ceremony. There, partially obscured among a crowd of lawyers and executives, was a woman in a navy dress, her face nearly invisible behind designer sunglasses. The image quality wasn't perfect, but it was unmistakably me. "The resolution isn't ideal," Amanda commented with studied casualness, "but the woman's posture, her height, even the way she carries herself, it's remarkably similar to you, Margaret." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin studied the photo with growing recognition, and I had to admire Amanda's thoroughness. She'd clearly spent the night researching, digging through archived news articles and business reports. But at the same time, I felt the carefully constructed walls of my privacy beginning to crumble. "What an interesting coincidence," I said finally. "Never admit anything until you absolutely have to." "Right." Amanda's smile now had a razor's edge. "Coincidences are fascinating, aren't they? Like how my family's financial difficulties began right around the time someone paid $700 million for Michael's company." She paused for dramatic effect, clearly savoring the moment. "And then there's the timing. The acquisition happened just 18 months after your husband passed away, exactly when you would have been settling his estate and dealing with any significant assets he might have left behind." Kevin set down his wine glass with trembling hands. "Mom, please tell me you're not who she thinks you are." I looked at my son, the young man I'd raised to value honesty and integrity above all else, and knew that 14 years of well-intentioned deception were finally catching up to me. "Kevin, there are things about your father's patents and our investment activities that I never told you." Triumph blazed across Amanda's perfectly composed features. But as I watched her savor what she clearly believed was her moment of victory, I wondered if she had any idea what she just unleashed. Because Amanda Blackwood was about to learn there's a vast difference between suspecting someone has money and truly understanding what real wealth looks like. and she was about to discover that the quiet widow she'd dismissed as a family embarrassment was actually someone far more formidable than she'd ever imagined. Honey, the real show was just getting started. 3 days later, I found myself in the mahogany-paneled office of James Rodriguez, my financial advisor for the past 8 years. The lunch with Kevin and Amanda had ended with my son storming out in confusion and hurt, and my future daughter-in-law making thinly veiled threats about family transparency. Now I needed to understand exactly what kind of war I was about to fight. "Margaret, I have to say this is an unusual request," James said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he examined the thick folder of documents spread across his antique desk. "What's prompted this sudden interest in your future daughter-in-law's family financial history?" James was everything you'd want in a financial advisor, discreet, thorough, and expensive enough that his silence was guaranteed. "I've discovered that when I acquired Blackwood Industries, I essentially eliminated my future daughter-in-law's inheritance," I explained. "And she's not taking it well." James raised his eyebrows in that way that suggested he'd seen this movie before. "Your daughter-in-law? The one who just got engaged to Kevin?" When I nodded, he let out a low whistle that spoke volumes about the complexity of the situation. "Margaret, this is very complicated. Let me pull up the files." What I was about to discover would make Amanda's little investigation look like child's play. He opened several documents on his computer, financial reports and credit analyses, painting a picture I hadn't fully grasped before. "In 2021, Blackwood Industries was hemorrhaging money," James began, his tone taking on the clinical precision of a surgeon describing a terminal diagnosis. Catherine Blackwood had over-leveraged the company, borrowing heavily to fund an aggressive expansion strategy. I remembered that acquisition well, one of my most strategic investments. "The fundamentals were solid," he continued. "Good client relationships, experienced workforce, proven technology. But Catherine had borrowed against future earnings that never materialized. Classic case of hubris meeting reality. What was the family's expectation regarding succession?" James pulled up another document. "According to everything I can find, Amanda Blackwood was being groomed as her mother's successor. She'd worked there during college, earned her MBA specifically to take over the family business. The pieces were falling into place with uncomfortable clarity. So when I acquired the company and brought in professional management, you eliminated what she considered her birthright," James finished. "But here's where it gets interesting." He turned his monitor toward me. "I've been monitoring some unusual activity over the past week. Someone has been making very sophisticated inquiries about your investment structures." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of inquiries?" "Professional-grade research into shell company ownership, anonymous investor tracking, complex asset tracing. This isn't casual curiosity, Margaret. Someone with serious resources and legal connections is building a comprehensive profile of your financial activities." The implications hit me like a physical blow. 14 years of carefully constructed privacy, of legal structures designed to maintain anonymity, could be unraveled by someone with sufficient motivation and resources. How vulnerable are we? James leaned back in his leather chair, his expression grave. "Your privacy structures are sophisticated, but they're not impenetrable. A determined investigation with proper legal backing and unlimited budget could eventually trace everything back to you." He pulled up a complex diagram showing the web of corporations and trusts I'd used to maintain anonymity. It would take time, money, and expertise, but it's possible. The question is, what's driving this investigation? I thought about Amanda's performance at lunch, the way she'd presented her discoveries like a chess master revealing her strategy. What would you recommend? Honestly, get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. If someone is building a case for financial impropriety or trying to establish some kind of legal claim, you need to control the narrative. James opened another file, this one containing information that made my blood run cold. "But Margaret, there's something else you need to consider. If this becomes public, it won't just affect you. Kevin's career could be seriously damaged." I hadn't considered that angle, but James was absolutely right. Kevin's reputation in the financial industry was built on merit, his analytical skills, his work ethic, his integrity. If people discovered his mother was a secret billionaire, Every success he'd achieved would be questioned. It was a cruel irony. I'd hidden my wealth to protect his independence, and now that secret could destroy everything he'd worked for. There's more, James continued, pulling up credit reports and financial statements. The Blackwood family's current situation is far more precarious than they're letting on. The documents painted a picture of a family living on borrowed time. The estate is mortgaged at 78% of its value. Their investment accounts have been systematically drained to maintain their lifestyle. Most of Catherine's current income comes from consulting contracts that you arranged through Blackwood Industries' new management. So they were essentially living off my charity without knowing it. But here's the most concerning part, James said, highlighting several recent transactions. Amanda has opened multiple new lines of credit in the past month, borrowing significant amounts against anticipated future income. The pattern was clear and disturbing. She's not just investigating your finances, Margaret. She's financing something that requires substantial upfront capital, investigators, lawyers, maybe even preparing for litigation. When I left James's office, I realized I was facing a choice that would define the rest of my life. This wasn't just about protecting my privacy anymore. This was about preventing everything I'd built from being weaponized against my own family. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since David's funeral. I opened the bottle of 1982 Bordeaux we'd been saving for our 40th wedding anniversary, a celebration we'd never have. I poured myself a generous glass and spread 14 years of financial records across my dining table. If Amanda wanted to play investigator, she was about to discover she'd chosen the wrong opponent. The numbers told a story of patience, strategy, and methodical wealth building that went far beyond what even James fully understood. David and I hadn't just gotten lucky with his patent, we'd built an empire. That initial $30 million had been the seed of something much larger. More importantly, I'd been quietly building influence that extended far beyond simple wealth. I had significant stakes in companies across multiple industries, licensing agreements that generated steady royalty streams, and investments in technologies that were shaping the future. I wasn't just a woman with money. I was a player in the innovation economy. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "Mom, Amanda and I want to come over tomorrow night. She has some ideas about how our family should handle this new information." I almost laughed at the audacity. Amanda had ideas about how to handle my money. I could already imagine what they involved: trust funds, family boards, collaborative decision-making that would give her access to resources she'd never earned. What she didn't understand was that I'd been managing expectations and protecting my interests longer than she'd been alive. I opened my laptop and began my own investigation into Amanda's recent activities. If she wanted to play detective, it was time she learned what real investigation looked like. What I discovered over the next 2 hours was both fascinating and deeply disturbing. Amanda had indeed hired Sterling Private Investigations, a firm that specialized in tracking hidden assets and uncovering financial fraud. She'd also retained Morrison, Hayes and Associates, a white-shoe law firm known for high-stakes family disputes and trust litigation. Most tellingly, she'd borrowed $47,000 across multiple credit lines, all within the past month. The pattern was clear. She hadn't fallen in love with my son. She'd identified him as an investment opportunity and was now trying to maximize her return. The wine was making me philosophical, or maybe just brutally honest with myself. I'd spent 14 years being the invisible widow, letting people underestimate me while I quietly built something extraordinary. But Amanda's little performance had changed the rules of the game. I was tired of being underestimated. More than tired. I was done with it. Tomorrow, when Kevin brought his calculating fiancée to discuss her ideas for our family's financial future, I was going to give them both an education about exactly who they'd decided to investigate. Because Margaret Chen, the cautious investor, was about to become Margaret Chen, the strategic opponent. And honey, I'd been winning games for 14 years that other people didn't even know existed. Class was about to be in session. Kevin and Amanda arrived at my apartment the next evening, with all the ceremony of diplomats approaching a delicate negotiation. You know that feeling when someone walks into your home like they already own it? That was Amanda. I'd prepared with my usual understated hospitality. A simple cheese and fruit platter, a moderately priced bottle of wine. Nothing that would betray the resources I actually commanded. Always let them underestimate you until it's time to reveal your hand. Mom, thanks for agreeing to sit down with us, Kevin began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone walking through a minefield. I know the last few days have been complicated. Like discovering your mother is a secret billionaire is just a minor scheduling conflict. Kevin looked like he hadn't slept since our conversation. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke to the emotional turmoil of having his entire understanding of his family turned upside down. The revelation about my hidden wealth had shaken him more deeply than I'd anticipated. Amanda, on the other hand, looked like she was preparing for the most important business presentation of her life. She was dressed in an elegant suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her Columbia MBA training evident in both the leather briefcase she carried and the way she arranged herself in my armchair like a CEO taking control of a boardroom. Her confidence was about to become a liability. Margaret, I want to start by saying that everything we discussed tonight is for the benefit of our family. She began with the polished assurance of someone who believed they held all the advantages. We're all on the same side here. Honey, if we were on the same side, you wouldn't have hired a private investigator to dig into my financial history. Of course, dear. What did you want to discuss? I kept my voice warm and curious, giving no hint of the storm that was coming. She opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency, revealing several carefully prepared documents that looked like they'd been drafted by expensive lawyers. The audacity was breathtaking. She discovers I have money and immediately starts planning how to access it. Well, I've been thinking about our conversation at lunch, and I believe we got off on the wrong foot, she said, arranging papers on my coffee table like she was setting up a war room. I'd like to propose a more collaborative approach to our family's financial planning. Collaborative? That's a fancy word for give me control of your assets. Collaborative how? I asked, though I suspected I knew exactly where this was heading. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing undercurrents he couldn't identify. Amanda has some ideas about how we could structure things to benefit everyone, he added, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with whatever his fiancée had planned. Poor Kevin, still thinking this was about family harmony. The thing is, Margaret, Amanda continued, warming to her presentation like a professor delivering a well-rehearsed lecture, family wealth works most effectively when it's managed strategically across generations. Kevin and I have been discussing the creation of a structure that would protect your privacy while allowing for greater transparency in our collective planning. There it was, the real purpose of this meeting. I took a sip of wine and waited for her to continue, my expression carefully neutral. Never interrupt your opponent when they're making a mistake. We're envisioning a family foundation, she said, pulling out what appeared to be a preliminary legal document. Something that would allow us to make strategic, charitable donations, optimize our tax advantages, and coordinate our investment activities more effectively. She slid the document across the table toward me. I've already had some preliminary conversations with a lawyer who specializes in family wealth management and philanthropic structures. The sheer presumption was staggering. It looks quite thorough, I said, glancing at the documents without touching them. Like I was going to put my fingerprints on her little scheme. The foundation would be governed by a board of family trustees, she continued, her excitement building as she outlined her vision. You, me, Kevin, and any children we might have in the future. Equal representation would ensure that all voices are heard in major financial decisions. Kevin looked at the documents spread across my coffee table, clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of what his fiancée was proposing. Amanda, maybe we should slow down, he said, his voice carrying a note of caution. This is a lot to process, and I'm not sure Mom is ready for this kind of discussion. Actually, Kevin, I think your fiancé has put considerable thought into this, I said calmly. Tell me, Amanda, what did you have in mind for the initial funding of this foundation? Her eyes lit up with the unmistakable gleam of someone who thought they were about to strike gold. Well, I thought we could start with something substantial enough to make a meaningful impact in the philanthropic community, she replied, her voice taking on the confident tone of someone presenting a business plan to investors. Perhaps around $50 million to establish credibility and attract matching funds from other major donors. $50 million from the woman who'd introduced me as the family embarrassment less than a week ago. And the governance structure you mentioned, I continued with studied casualness. How would voting rights be distributed among the trustees? I believe equal representation would be the most logical and fair approach, she replied without hesitation. 3 trustees, 3 votes, very democratic and transparent. Democratic, right. 2 against 1 isn't democracy, honey. It's a coup. I set my wine glass down on the table and looked directly into her eyes with the kind of calm intensity that comes from holding all the cards. Amanda, can I ask you something honestly? Of course, she said, though I detected the first hint of wariness in her voice. Smart girl. She should be wary. Do you love my son? The question hit her like a physical blow. She looked at Kevin, then back at me, her carefully constructed composure faltering for the first time since she'd arrived. What kind of question is that? She asked, clearly flustered by the unexpected shift in conversation. A simple one, I replied, my voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who'd spent decades reading people's true motivations. Do you love Kevin for who he is? Or do you love what you think being married to him represents? The silence that followed was electric with tension. Kevin looked between us, his confusion giving way to growing alarm as he began to sense the deeper currents flowing beneath this conversation. Amanda's mask was beginning to slip. I think it's unfair how you're framing our relationship, she said, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Is it? I stood up and walked to the bookshelf where I'd placed a thick folder earlier that day. Because I have some information that might clarify things. I returned to my seat and opened the folder, revealing the comprehensive investigation report James had prepared. Amanda's face went pale as she recognized some of the documents. Recognition and fear. A dangerous combination. This is a detailed record of your communications with Sterling Private Investigations over the past 2 weeks, I said, my voice carrying the calm precision of a surgeon making an incision. It appears you've hired them to research corporate ownership structures and track anonymous investors. I picked up another document. Quite expensive from what I can see. Almost $15,000 so far, charged to 3 different credit cards. Kevin stared at his fiancée in disbelief. Amanda, you hired private investigators to look into my family? It's not what it looks like, she said quickly, her voice cracking under the pressure. I just wanted to better understand our family's financial situation before we got married. You were building a case, I corrected her, my tone remaining conversational despite the devastating nature of what I was revealing. These documents show you also consulted with Morrison, Hayes & Associates, a law firm that specializes in family estate disputes and trust litigation. I picked up another paper from the folder. They charge $800 an hour, by the way. This is particularly interesting. You've opened 3 new lines of credit in the past month, borrowing a total of $47,000 against anticipated future income. Amanda was unraveling before our eyes. Her carefully constructed facade had vanished, replaced by something that looked like panic mixed with calculation. Margaret, you have to understand, she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. I was just trying to protect our family's interests and ensure everyone was being completely honest with each other. Whose interests exactly? I asked, my voice carrying just enough edge to cut through her protestations. Because according to this comprehensive financial analysis James prepared, your family's situation is far more precarious than you've been letting on. I placed several more documents on the coffee table. Your parents' estate is mortgaged for almost 80% of its value. Their investment accounts have been systematically drained to maintain their lifestyle since your mother lost control of Blackwood Industries. Kevin examined the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to anger to deep disappointment. In fact, most of their current income comes from consulting contracts that I personally arranged through the company's new management structure. The room went dead silent. Mom, how do you know all this? Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because, Kevin, when someone starts investigating me with the intention of building a legal case, I investigate them right back, And what I discovered is that your fiancé's family has been living on borrowed time and borrowed money for the past 2 years." Amanda finally found her voice again, but it was shaky and desperate. "This doesn't change the fact that we're going to be family. We should be working together, not against each other." "You're absolutely right," I said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the city lights. "We should be working together." I turned to face them both. "The question is, what kind of work did you have in mind? Because here's what I think happened. You discovered I have money, and you immediately started planning how to gain access to it." I walked back to my chair and sat down. "Not how to contribute to our family's well-being, not how to help manage existing assets responsibly, but how to restructure everything so that you would have control over resources you never earned." "That's not fair," Amanda protested, but her voice lacked any real conviction. "Isn't it?" I reached into the folder one final time and pulled out a document that would end this charade once and for all. "This is a transcript of a phone call you had with your college roommate 3 weeks before you met Kevin." Amanda's face went completely white. "In it, you specifically mention that you're tired of dating men who can't offer you financial security, and that you're actively seeking someone from a wealthy family with good long-term prospects." The silence that followed was absolute. Kevin was staring at his fiancée like he was seeing her for the first time, and Amanda looked like she was calculating how quickly she could escape from this nightmare. "Kevin," I said gently, my voice carrying all the love and protection I'd felt for him since the day he was born. "I think you need to ask yourself whether the woman you're engaged to is really who you thought she was." But even as I said it, I knew this confrontation was just the beginning. Amanda Blackwood wasn't the type to give up easily, and I'd just shown her exactly how much was at stake. "So, what happens now?" Kevin asked quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of shattered illusions. I looked at my son, the man I'd raised to value honesty and integrity above all else. "Now," I said, "we find out what everyone is really made of." And honey, the stress test was about to begin. The next 2 weeks passed in a silence so tense you could have cut it with a knife. Kevin moved back to his own condo, telling me he needed time to process everything he'd learned about his family and his relationship. You know that feeling when your child looks at you like you're a stranger? It cuts deeper than any physical pain. Amanda had stormed out of my apartment that night, but not before making it crystal clear that she considered our conversation a declaration of war. And she proved to be far more dangerous than I'd initially imagined. The first sign of serious escalation came when James Rodriguez called me on a Friday morning, his voice carrying a tension I'd never heard before. "Margaret, we have a major problem. Someone has initiated formal inquiries with the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding your investment structures." My stomach dropped like an elevator with severed cables. "What kind of inquiries?" "Allegations of failure to properly disclose beneficial ownership in publicly traded companies. Questions about possible insider trading violations. Suggestions that your shell companies may have failed to report their activities to federal authorities as required by law." He paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Margaret, this isn't casual curiosity anymore. Someone is trying to build a serious federal case against you." I knew exactly who that someone was. "How serious is this?" "Very serious. Your investment structures are complex enough that they could appear suspicious to regulators who don't understand the full context. If they file formal complaints, you could be facing months or even years of federal investigations, even if you're eventually cleared of any wrongdoing." The implications were staggering. Not just the potential legal costs, which could run into millions of dollars, but the media exposure would destroy the privacy I'd maintained for 14 years. Every aspect of my life would be scrutinized, every investment questioned, every decision second-guessed by people who had no understanding of the careful planning that had gone into building my wealth. Every relationship would be viewed through the lens of money. What do you recommend? Frankly, shut this down before it escalates any further. Whatever family conflict is driving this needs to be resolved quickly and decisively, because regulatory scrutiny has a way of expanding far beyond the original complaint. I hung up the phone, my mind racing through the implications. Amanda had escalated from private investigation to full legal warfare, hoping to force me into a settlement by threatening the very foundation of everything I'd built. It was a smart strategy, though morally bankrupt. She was betting that I'd rather pay her off than risk exposure and potential criminal charges. My phone rang again. It was Kevin. "Mom, we need to talk. Something serious has happened." He arrived an hour later looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. The stress had taken a visible toll. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and there was a haunted quality in his eyes that broke my heart. "Amanda filed for legal separation yesterday," he said without preamble, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Her lawyer says she's concerned about potential financial liabilities from undisclosed family assets." I had to admire her tactical brilliance, even as I despised her methods. By filing for separation, she was protecting herself legally while simultaneously setting the stage for a divorce negotiation where she could claim entitlement to assets she believed Kevin should have inherited. It was chess played at the highest level. "I'm sorry, Kevin. I know this isn't what you wanted. Are you really sorry?" He looked at me with eyes that held more pain than anger. "Because it feels like you orchestrated this entire situation. Like you wanted my engagement to fall apart just to prove some point about her character." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "Kevin, I never wanted your engagement to fail. I wanted you to understand who you were really engaged to before it was too late. By systematically destroying her family's financial stability and investigating her like she was some kind of criminal," he shot back, his voice rising with emotion. "Mom, I don't even know who you are anymore. The woman who raised me would never have done something like this." That stung more than I cared to admit, but I held my ground. "I'm the same person who taught you to value honesty and integrity above everything else. The same one who wanted you to succeed based on your own merits, not because of family money you didn't even know existed. And look how that turned out," he said bitterly. "My fiancée is leaving me. Her family's finances are in ruins, and my mother turns out to be some kind of business mogul who's been lying to me for 14 years. I wanted to comfort him the way I had when he was a little boy. But the distance between us felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Kevin, there's something else you need to know. Amanda has filed formal complaints with federal authorities about my investment activities. She's trying to force me into a public legal battle that could destroy everything I've built." He stared at me in shock. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't over. It's just beginning. And I need you to decide whether you're going to stand with me or allow her to destroy everything I built to protect our family's future." The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Kevin looked at me with what seemed like the beginning of understanding mixed with resignation. "What do you want me to do?" And that's when I knew my son was finally ready to learn what his mother was truly capable of. The meeting took place in James Rodriguez's conference room the following Monday. The attendees read like a cast list for a high-stakes legal drama: me, Kevin, Amanda, her lawyer Mark Stevens, and her parents Catherine and Richard Blackwood. The atmosphere was so charged with tension you could have powered the building. The conference room itself was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, a mahogany table that could seat 20 people, and walls lined with leather-bound law books and financial journals that spoke of serious money and serious consequences. It was the kind of room where fortunes were made and destroyed with the stroke of a pen. "Let's be absolutely clear about why we're here," Mark Stevens began, his voice carrying the polished authority of someone who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every penny. "My client has discovered that Mrs. Chen has been concealing substantial assets while allowing her son's fiancé's family to suffer significant financial hardship." Stevens was a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, the kind of attorney who specialized in high-stakes family disputes and had a reputation for winning through sheer intimidation. This pattern suggests a deliberate strategy of deception and manipulation that warrants investigation by federal authorities. James, sitting beside me, responded with the calm precision of someone who'd been through these battles before. "Mr. Stevens, Mrs. Chen's financial activities are entirely legal and properly documented. Your client's recent complaints to federal authorities appear to be motivated by personal animosity rather than any legitimate regulatory concerns. Amanda leaned forward, her voice steady, but carrying an undertone of cold fury. This isn't about personal animosity, James. It's about family accountability and basic human decency. Margaret has been systematically manipulating people's lives while pretending to be someone she's not. I finally spoke, my voice carrying the quiet authority that comes from knowing you hold all the real power in the room. Amanda, I've never manipulated anyone. I invested in failing companies and made them profitable. I kept my private life private because I value discretion and privacy. None of those things are illegal, immoral, or even unusual. You bought my mother's company and allowed her to believe she had failed as a businesswoman, she shot back, her composure beginning to crack under pressure. Your mother did fail as a businesswoman, I replied with devastating calm. I saved her company and protected hundreds of jobs. Under her management, Blackwood Industries would have declared bankruptcy within 6 months. Catherine Blackwood, who had been silent up to this point, cleared her throat with the kind of aristocratic authority that comes from generations of inherited privilege. Mrs. Chen, while I appreciate what you did for the company, you cannot deny that you were deliberately deceptive about your involvement in our family's affairs, Catherine said, her voice carrying the wounded pride of someone who'd discovered they'd been patronizing their own benefactor. Strategic? Yes. Deceptive? No. You never asked about my investments, Mrs. Blackwood, and I had no legal or moral obligation to volunteer information about my private financial activities. Mark Stevens pulled out a thick folder and began spreading documents across the mahogany table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Mrs. Chen, we have compiled extensive evidence that you used your financial position to systematically manipulate various situations involving my client's family. The consulting fee arrangements for Mrs. Blackwood, the strategic timing of certain business decisions, even the comprehensive investigation into my client's personal affairs. Evidence of what exactly? James asked, his voice sharp with professional skepticism. Of a calculated pattern of control and manipulation designed to maintain power over this family's financial future while keeping them deliberately ignorant of their complete dependence on your client's goodwill. I looked around the table at the people who thought they understood the game they were playing. These were individuals who had spent their entire lives believing that money and social position gave them power over others. They were about to learn what real power actually looked like. Mr. Stevens, let me be absolutely clear about something, I said, my voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone who had spent 14 years building an empire in secret. I don't control your client's family. I don't owe them money. I don't owe them explanations about my business decisions. I paused to let that sink in. And I certainly don't owe them access to assets I built through my own intelligence and hard work. But you do owe basic honesty to your son, Amanda interrupted, her voice rising with desperation. And fundamental respect to the woman who's going to be your daughter-in-law. Respect? A cold calm settled over me like armor. You introduced me as the family embarrassment at your engagement party. You hired private investigators to dig into my personal financial history. You filed regulatory complaints with federal authorities to try to force me into a financial settlement. I stood up slowly, my voice never rising above conversational level. And now you want to lecture me about respect? The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin, who had been quiet throughout the entire confrontation, finally spoke. What do you want, Amanda? What will it actually take to end this? She exchanged a meaningful look with her lawyer, then fixed me with a stare that was equal parts calculation and desperation. I want a formal family financial agreement that establishes clear expectations and responsibilities for all parties involved. What kind of responsibilities? James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew where this was heading. Mark Stevens presented another document with the flourish of someone revealing their master strategy. We propose the establishment of a family fund structure with shared governance. Mrs. Chen would contribute a substantial portion of her assets. We're suggesting $25 million initially, to a fund that would be managed by a family board for the benefit of all members. The audacity was breathtaking. You want me to put my money into a fund controlled by a committee that includes the very people who are currently investigating me and filing complaints against me with federal authorities? We want a fair and equitable agreement that protects everyone's legitimate interests, Amanda said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that suggested she was beginning to realize how weak her position actually was. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the street where normal people were living their normal lives, completely unaware of the financial warfare being conducted 20 floors above their heads. I have a counterproposal, I said, turning to face the room with the kind of calm that comes from holding all the cards. Amanda, you have exactly 72 hours to withdraw all regulatory complaints and cease all investigative activities directed at me or my financial affairs. In return, I will provide you with a settlement that will allow you and your parents to maintain your current lifestyle without any further interference from me. What kind of settlement? Mark Stevens asked, his voice carrying a note of suspicion mixed with professional curiosity. $8 million. A one-time payment, transferred immediately upon execution of a comprehensive agreement. In exchange, you sign legally binding documents promising never to contact me or my son again, and you dissolve your engagement to Kevin immediately and permanently. The room went completely silent. Kevin stared at me in shock, his face a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been admiration. Mom, you can't be serious. But I had just offered $8 million to permanently remove toxic people from our lives. And from the expressions on their faces, everyone in that room was beginning to understand exactly how serious I was about protecting what mattered most to me. 8 million, Amanda repeated slowly, like she was testing the words to see if they were real. To never contact Kevin again. That's correct. Mark Stevens was already doing the mathematical calculations. I could see it in his eyes. $8 million in guaranteed cash versus years of expensive litigation with an uncertain outcome and the very real possibility of his client facing criminal charges if the federal investigation uncovered any irregularities in her own financial activities. Mrs. Chen, that's certainly a generous offer, but it seems specifically designed to terminate an engagement rather than resolve a family conflict. Mr. Stevens, that engagement was already terminally damaged the moment your client decided to investigate my family for financial gain, rather than building a relationship based on love and mutual respect. I'm simply offering to pay for a clean break instead of enduring years of messy litigation. Kevin jumped up from his chair, his voice filled with a pain that broke my heart. Mom, stop. Just stop, both of you. He looked around the room with an expression of pure disgust. This is completely insane. We're sitting here negotiating the price of my engagement like it's some kind of business transaction. And isn't that exactly what it's been? I asked quietly. He turned to Amanda, his voice carrying the weight of shattered dreams and broken trust. Amanda, I need you to answer something honestly, and I need the truth. Did you get engaged to me because you loved me for who I am? Or because you thought I came from a wealthy family that could provide you with financial security? The silence that followed stretched for almost a full minute. I watched Amanda's face as she calculated her response, weighing honesty against strategy, love against financial opportunity. Kevin, that's not a fair question, she finally said, her voice lacking any real conviction. It's the only question that matters. I watched my son's face as he waited for an answer that would never come, as the truth of his relationship crystallized in that moment of silence. In that silence, 14 years of careful choices, financial privacy, and quiet protection all came together in a single moment of absolute clarity. $8 million, I repeated, looking directly at Amanda with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you've already won. Plus, I'll personally arrange for your parents to keep their house and for your mother to maintain her consulting position at Blackwood Industries for the next 5 years, guaranteeing their financial stability. I leaned forward slightly. You sign the papers, transfer the ring back to Kevin, and walk away from my family forever. And if I refuse? She asked, though her voice carried no real defiance. I smiled, And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, it was completely genuine. Then you get nothing. Your parents lose their house within 6 months when the mortgage comes due. Your mother loses her consulting income immediately, and you'll spend the next several years tied up in federal litigation that will cost far more than you could ever hope to gain. Mark Stevens was whispering urgently in Amanda's ear, no doubt explaining the brutal mathematical reality of the situation. $8 million in guaranteed cash, plus financial security for her parents, versus years of expensive legal battles with an uncertain outcome and the very real possibility of criminal prosecution. "I need time to think about this," Amanda said. But I could see in her eyes that she had already made her decision. "You have until noon tomorrow. After that, the offer expires permanently, and you face all the consequences of the complaints you filed and the investigations you've initiated." When the meeting ended, Kevin stayed behind while the others filed out in tense silence. "Mom, did you really just offer to buy my fiancé's freedom?" "No, honey. I just gave you the information you needed to make your own decision about who you want to spend your life with." He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city below. "And if she takes the money, then you'll know exactly who she was all along, and you can move forward with your life. And if she doesn't take it, you'll still know who she was." I paused. "And I'll make sure she regrets ever trying to manipulate our family." Kevin looked at me with something that seemed like a mixture of admiration and healthy fear. "When did you become so ruthless?" I considered his question seriously. "I think I always was, Kevin. I just never had a reason to show it before now." At 11:47 the next morning, Mark Stevens called James Rodriguez to formally accept the settlement. By 5 p.m. that same day, the papers were signed, the money was transferred, and Amanda Blackwood had disappeared from our lives as completely as if she had never existed. Kevin filed for divorce the following week, citing irreconcilable differences. The regulatory complaints were withdrawn, the federal investigations were terminated, and my privacy was restored. But more importantly, my son was free. 6 months later, Kevin called me on a Sunday afternoon, and I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard since before he'd met Amanda. Genuine happiness. "Mom, I met someone. Her name is Sarah. She's a third-grade teacher, and she has absolutely no idea you're wealthy." "How can you be sure?" "Because when I told her my mom lived in a nice apartment and drove a reliable car, she said it sounded like a woman who had her priorities exactly right." I smiled, feeling something in my chest finally loosen after months of tension. "She sounds absolutely perfect. When do I get to meet her?" "Next Sunday, if you're free." "But Mom, when we have dinner, can you just be the woman who taught me to work hard and treat people with kindness? Can you leave the powerful businesswoman at home for one evening?" I laughed, realizing that after 14 years of hiding who I was, I finally understood the difference between being invisible and being private. "Of course, honey. But if we discover she's been investigating our family's financial history, all bets are off." "Deal," he said, and I could hear his smile through the phone. For the first time in months, the future looked exactly as bright as I had always planned it to be. After everything that happened, I discovered that the greatest wealth I possessed wasn't my investment portfolio or my hidden bank accounts. It was the opportunity to start over and decide how I wanted to spend the rest of my time, energy, and resources. For 14 years, I had lived in the shadows, afraid of the world discovering who I really was. Now I understood that real power comes from choosing how you want to be remembered and what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. My first decision was simple but profound. I sold the apartment where I had spent the last 14 years hiding from my own success. It held too many memories of secrets and careful deceptions. I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, a place that had always fascinated me with its vibrant arts community and stunning mountain beauty. There, nobody knew me as the mysterious billionaire or the difficult mother-in-law. I was simply Margaret, a woman who enjoyed browsing the farmers market on Saturday mornings and chatting with local artists about their work. I also established something I called the David Chen Innovation Fund. No press releases, no golden plaques with my name, no elaborate galas or fundraising events. Just a small, discreet foundation dedicated to supporting young engineers and inventors who had brilliant ideas but lacked the resources to bring them to market. We operate quietly, just the way I prefer. In the past 3 years, we've funded 68 patents, helped 27 startups get off the ground, and provided full scholarships to over 200 engineering students from low-income families. David would have loved seeing his legacy continue this way, helping the next generation of innovators change the world. My relationship with Kevin took time to heal, but we eventually found our way back to each other. There were awkward dinners and painful conversations as we both learned to navigate our new reality. But when I met Sarah, I knew that everything we had been through was worth it. Sarah was everything Amanda wasn't: genuine, kind, unpretentious, and completely uninterested in material wealth. She taught 3rd grade at an inner-city school and spent her weekends volunteering at animal shelters. When Kevin brought her to meet me, she hugged me like she had known me her entire life. Now I understand where Kevin gets his ability to listen without judgment and his belief that everyone deserves a chance to succeed, she said. That's when I knew the mother-son bond, though tested, was stronger than ever. At Christmas, for the first time in years, my table was filled with genuine laughter. No expensive champagne or elaborate displays of wealth, just homemade cookies, hot chocolate, and terribly sung carols. I won't lie to you, honey. There are still moments when Amanda's shadow crosses my thoughts. I know that with $8 million, she has probably found another way to reinvent herself, maybe in another city, with another unsuspecting victim. But that's not my problem anymore. Now my days are filled with simple routines that bring me genuine joy. Pottery classes on Tuesday mornings where I'm enthusiastic but terrible. Brunch with my neighbors where we discuss everything from local politics to the best hiking trails. I don't need bodyguards or armored cars or elaborate security systems. I need peace, community, and the satisfaction of using my resources to make a positive difference. The funny thing is, when I finally stopped hiding who I was, I also stopped being afraid. I'm no longer afraid of someone discovering my wealth because I understand that the numbers in a bank account don't define my worth as a human being. What defines me is how I choose to use those resources to transform other people's lives. A few months ago, a young woman who had received a scholarship from the David Chen Innovation Fund approached me with tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Margaret," she said, "thank you for believing in me when nobody else would. If it weren't for your foundation, I would still be working double shifts at a factory to pay for school. Now I'm graduating from MIT with a degree in biomedical engineering." That moment of sincere gratitude was the real end of all the drama with the Blackwood family. Today, when I look back on everything that happened, I can smile. Yes, I was strategically invisible for 14 years, but I learned that invisibility can be a powerful choice rather than a limiting prison sentence. And I discovered that the most elegant form of revenge isn't destroying the person who tried to humiliate you. It's thriving magnificently in their absence. So here I am, in my 60s, living in a city that smells like fresh mountain air and blooming dogwoods, surrounded by people who measure my worth not by my net worth, but by my presence in their community. I finally understood that life wasn't asking me to be perfect, just to be authentic and generous with whatever gifts I had been given. And if someone ever introduces me as a family embarrassment again, I have my response ready. The real embarrassment is wasting your life trying to impress people who don't matter when you could be spending it making a difference that will outlast your own time on Earth. The story we've shared with you today is fictional, but it's inspired by real events that happen in families across America every single day. Names and locations have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell this story to judge anyone, but in the hope that someone listening will pause and think about how many parents, especially mothers, suffer in silence within their own families. How many are underestimated and undervalued by the very people who should love them unconditionally? I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts, honey. If you had been in my position, what would you have done? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace? Or would you have found the courage to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice and protect what you had built? I want to know what you think, because every story we share is a candle that can light someone else's path through their own difficult times. God always blesses those who stand up for what's right, and I firmly believe that courage, even when it's painful, leads us to better days and stronger relationships built on truth rather than deception. Meanwhile, on your screen right now, you'll find two of our channel's most beloved stories about family secrets and unexpected revelations. I promise they'll surprise you and maybe help you see your own family dynamics in a completely new light. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Your support means everything to me, and I hope this story has given you something meaningful to think about. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by what others think of you, but by how you choose to use whatever gifts you've been given to make the world just a little bit better. Which city are you listening from today? I love seeing where these stories travel,